Okay. Good afternoon. Welcome back. Let's get rolling. So today we're picking up where we left off in talking about health and science campaigns. There's also some cleanup and housekeeping that I wanted to do related to your grades on the health disparity presentations, and talking through those presentations a little bit more, and also talking through just what to expect for that final essay and an extra credit opportunity. So we'll do that, and then we'll get into some of the fun stuff about designing, implementing, and developing campaigns and exploring ways that you all might utilize some of these theories and approaches toward designing a campaign in your own lives. So last class, we started to talk about health and science campaigns, understanding this idea of the ways that these campaigns are developed, targeting a specific audience. Like we're trying to tell teenagers that they need to wear a helmet, right? We'll tell them through specific commercials or other campaign type strategies. As a reminder for this class, I'm asking you to pick a health or science campaign that you find interesting. It could synergize with the work that you put in for your health disparities presentation, or it can be totally different. So for instance, maybe there's a campaign that's designed to provide access to cancer screening and tests among ethnic minorities, or to provide greater support for Indigenous mental health, right? Depending on the topic, there might be a specific initiative that you see as really interesting, or you could pick something entirely new. So we talked about how these campaigns are designed, how they're targeted, right? And what we'll be looking at today is a little bit more of a deep dive into what ultimately persuades or motivates us to change, right? Because as we've learned, a health campaign could be well designed, it could be informative. So what? If it doesn't actually change our perspectives or opinions on a topic, then what's the point of that? And who is that serving, right? So one thing we talked about last class was what's known as blank, which argues that people with more plentiful resources are more likely to continue seeking information and vice versa. What was this idea? Yes. So yes, this is the knowledge gap hypothesis, right? We can kind of think about it as two lines that are diverging, right? That the more people have access to information, the more they seek out information. If you have a library, if you have easy access to a phone or computer, tablet, right? There's a good chance if you find out that you've been diagnosed with diabetes, that you're going to gather more information. But if you don't have those resources, you're less likely to seek out information and it spirals from there. And that ties itself to this idea of the digital divide. While we have a lot more internet access than we used to and a lot more accessibility of material that's virtual, that there are still gaps and disparities in those types of issues. So for today, I want to take some time to talk about some of the feedback and things I noticed in the presentation. While there isn't another presentation in this class, I find it's just useful since we all have to do presentations for classes or in real life, and noting some of the things that I observed through that I think can be useful in thinking about this going forward. I also posted the prompt and rubric for the campaign essay. So we'll talk a little bit about that and extra credit. And then we'll be talking about how health and science campaigns work, right? How human motivation, desire, and culture impact what makes a campaign effective. So I wanted to take some time to talk about the presentations. If you haven't already seen it on Canvas, if you check, you'll notice that you have a grade that's posted, and as part of the grade, it will show you the number of points that you've received from each section of the rubric. That overall breakdown shows you the score on the assignment. You'll also notice that I've left a comment that has identified some of the things that I think went really well with the presentation and some suggestions for growth going forward. So definitely look over that comment and feedback. If you're a little bit confused or uncertain about your grade or want to talk about it further, I'm happy to do so. But I will say across the board, grades were really good on this assignment. I felt like people did a great job overall in their presentation choice and in using supporting material throughout their presentation. So one thing that I mentioned the week that you all were presenting that I still think is that you all chose great topics, right? There were a range of issues that were incredibly educational and interesting in talking about things such as access to cancer screenings among Hispanic populations, talking about infant mortality rates, talking about domestic violence and its impact on ethnic minorities, talking about Indigenous health. There were so many great topics you all chose and really were able to take command of through good expertise. We really liked the way that you all were able to apply that in interesting ways, to the point that I was bragging about all of your successes and engaging work in our department meetings. So thanks for that. One thing to keep working on, I think some presentations did this really well, and some presentations can continue to explore this as you're thinking about this next project, is the communication element, right? Really thinking about how specific types of communication and particular strategies can be used to address or resolve that issue, right? So for instance, things such as that competency training, things such as using more open-ended or patient-centered care and communication, and drawing from some of those concepts or ideas might be useful. As we think to the next assignment, you might think about some of the theories and ideas that we'll be talking about and the ways in which those theories could explain the effectiveness of a health campaign. For example, maybe we think about the trans-theoretical model, the different stages of adapting or implementing a change, and use that to assess whether or not a campaign to promote healthy school lunch actually succeeded, right? So I think some of the presentations did an awesome job of explaining these strategies, including the use of more ethically diverse training, but also a couple of the presentations were a little bit more vague or didn't spend quite as much time in talking about that communication piece. I felt like the presentations were also really well paced and well outlined. I think one thing to continue to work on is just the use of outlines, right? The reason I ask you to complete that written outline is just so that you have something to directly go off of as you're working on your presentation that helps to jog your memory and work through material. Some of the outlines, were a little bit fragmented or had some formatting issues. Other presentations were maybe a little bit rushed in places. It can be challenging to figure out the amount of content to put into that window. So I encourage you to continue to work on kind of practicing and, scaffolding the amount that you try to cover relative to the length of a presentation. So again, I thought overall across the board, people did a great job on this assignment. Just a few things that I noticed in terms of what went well and areas to continue to work on for future presentations. Any questions related to this assignment? Yeah, your grades and feedback on that are up, and all of your grades in the course should be current. The grades on those remaining quizzes have been posted as well. So I want to talk a little bit about the rubric for the Health and Science Campaign essay and just some of the things that I'm looking for there. It's not due for like 3 weeks. So you do have a lot of time between now and June 11th, but I also know that, with Memorial Day and all of that, that our schedule is a little bit weird. So sometimes things can creep up on you. So as mentioned, right, you are going to analyze a major health and science campaign. We talked through, and I had you all share some examples on Monday, right, of campaigns to look at, and we'll be talking about a few more today. And what I'm asking you to do is to explain what this campaign is, who it's trying to reach, and how it conveys information about health and science. And then the real meat of this assignment is to focus on analyzing, right? What is the communication that this campaign does in terms of how messages relates to people, maybe uses and works with institutions and so on, right? And in your estimation, in what ways is it effective at doing so or not, right? So we might look at a campaign that's trying to reduce obesity through encouraging kids to get outside instead of watching TV. Or we might look at a campaign that's designed to reduce smoking through somebody speaking and talking about the dangers of smoking with a voice box, right? So regardless of what the campaign is, how is it communicating? And do you believe that that communication is effective? And as part of this essay, I am asking you to use at least 3 outside scholarly sources. These could be things that are building off of the theories and concepts that you're looking at. So for instance, if you're looking at the trans-theoretical model, maybe there's an article or 2 that is drawing from that idea. And then 4 or 5 pages, double spaced. The lower limit is something you should shoot for, but I'm pretty flexible if you go past the upper limit, if you go past 5 pages. As long as you're still on task and on topic, then it's fine to go a little bit longer. And as always, I'm happy to look over a rough draft, outline, to chat about ideas or anything similar. Just start to get on your radar an example of a campaign that you find especially interesting and worth exploring. So this essay is divided into a lot of different parts. The first part is the selection of a campaign that you picked, right? So you should choose a clear, well-defined campaign that relates to health and science communication. And the parts of the campaign that you're focusing on should be really identified clearly. Maybe it's a commercial, right? That's talking about the dangers of sexually transmitted diseases, right? So depending on what it is that you're choosing here, really making it clear what the campaign is and how the campaign works, and choosing a campaign relevant to health and science is important. The big meat of this presentation here is on the quality of analysis, right? Explaining how this campaign is able to communicate. So, showing, for example, quoted parts of the campaign or of its message or who it's trying to reach, and sort of showing us how that works. Drawing from examples in the campaign, examples from your sources in the class to look into the campaign itself are things that I'm really looking for there. Using those outside sources, again, those outside sources should be connected to the topics you're interested in. You can even use sources that you put together for your annotated bibliography or presentation, right? Those are fair game. And then structure, right, is another part that I'm looking for. Good introduction, clear body points, clear conclusion, right? I'm a big fan in terms of essay structure of tell me what you're going to tell me, right? Using a preview sentence or structuring the essay to really outline the key ideas that you're going over. Tell me, right? Use those body paragraphs to clearly identify the issues that you're covering. And then tell me what you told me, right? Using the conclusion to restate and move forward based on the work that you've done. And then the last thing that I'm just looking for are conventions, right? Making sure that you're citing your sources, that you have given it a look to make sure that any spelling or grammar issues have been resolved using MLA, APA, or Chicago, and just making sure that all of that's good to go. Again, I've recommended it before and I'll recommend it again. Choosing a different method of reviewing if you're proofreading is a really good way to do it, whether you're physically printing something out to look over it with a pen, or whether you download something as a PDF that's previously in a Google Doc, something that gives your brain, your eyes a different way of looking at the assignment, the way you can easily identify and figure out some convention issues. So there are a lot of parts to that rubric, but I just wanted to be as clear as possible about how I'm grading and looking at this assignment, and to give you plenty of time to really start to think about and explore this one too. Any questions? Awesome. I'm sure you might have some questions about this assignment later, so if they do come up, I'm happy to answer those. And then the last thing that I wanted to direct you to before we get started on the new stuff for today is extra credit. So if you've taken a class with me before, you know how this works, or you might have just heard how it worked in my communication theory class. But if you haven't, I like to offer extra credit, and there's a way I like to do so that's pretty straightforward. Basically, I have an extra credit prompt. If you complete the extra credit by the end of the quarter, by June 11th, then that adds 20 points or 2% onto your final grade. It's great if you have a good grade in the course and just want the added buffer, or maybe you're on the bubble of a grade you've wanted. I've had folks who were on the verge of not passing and were able to pass and completing. So this is available. It's due at the same time as your final paper. And I thought that this would be kind of a fun thing, because it's extra credit. It's asking you to go a little bit out of your comfort zone. But I think this could be an interesting project if you're interested in doing this. And what I'm asking you to do is to kind of practice creating your own health or science campaign, right? And I'm not asking you to create, organize and circulate it widely or anything like that. I'm asking you to develop a model of how you might be actually able to use a campaign. One of the ways that I've had people do this is to create a poster or to create a flyer or something similar to that, that might be educating the public about the issue. For example, educating people about access to healthy food, or talking about some of the ways that you can get a cancer screening or something like that, right? So the sky's the limit on how you design the campaign or the method you do. It doesn't have to be a poster or flyer, though it could be if you wanted it to be. You don't have to be a text expert, but I am a tech expert, but I am asking you to put some effort and thought into developing and laying out what this campaign is, right? So putting some thought into how you're structuring it, and again, thinking about who that person is. If you could visualize a single person that campaign is trying to reach, who is it and how are you trying to get there, right? If you're taking a film or media production class, you can even do a tiny little video or something like that if you wanted to. Once you have designed that campaign, however you choose, I'm asking you to just take a bit of time, short 1 to 1.5 pages, to talk about how your campaign works, how you utilized elements of messaging and communication to design the campaign, and who your target audience is, and how you see that campaign is reaching them. So again, this is completely optional, extra credit, just for fun. But I thought was an interesting way for us to apply and continue to think about things we've been talking about today. Any questions on this opportunity? Sweet. If you choose to do it, I look forward to seeing what you come up with. All right, so let's shift gears and talk about some of the new things that we're going to be going over for today, right? And again, building off of our discussion on Monday, if we know how a campaign is built and that it's trying to reach this ideal middle audience, the question now becomes, how is that audience persuaded or convinced or actually has a change of heart or a change of view, right? For example, we have seen a lot of messaging and circulation as it relates to COVID-19, including communication regarding vaccinations and other protocols, right? And while there might be some effect that we've seen in different areas, there are a lot of areas in which that type of messaging and campaigning has not been effective. Maybe somebody's already vaccinated and has already made a decision, or maybe somebody's not and does not plan to. So there's been a lot of challenges and questions related to why or why not some of these campaigns might be effective. And this idea, right, ties itself to social marketing. So if you've taken a course in advertising or business or marketing, for example, from the College of Business, Dr. Carpenter teaches on a lot of those issues. We actually had a candidate for public relations. We're starting a new public relations program who is kind of interested in social marketing and how we advertise or circulate material. I think there were a couple folks from this class in there. Emily, were you in that class? Yeah. So it's kind of a way of exploring and thinking about how we market or communicate about things. And the idea here is that the price, right, of a healthy behavior is worth paying. If we think about marketing, right, marketing is about trying to sell product, getting people to purchase a medication, getting people to sign on to a subscription service. And in the same way, right, marketing is about getting people to sign on to what we consider to be a healthy behavior. And the idea, right, is that the cost or the price could be monetary, it could be time, it could be invasive, but the payoff is not necessarily super tangible, right? For people that get a regular cancer screening or test, they might say to themselves, well, why? I don't think that I'm at risk. It's not going to affect me. I don't see a benefit, but I do see a trade-off in cost. It's going to mean that I can't work in the office today. I get paid by the hour, so I'm going to lose a bunch of money. It is a bit of a pain to drive to do that, right? So one of the challenges of marketing health, as we've been talking about, is this perception that the benefits just aren't there. And so if we don't see tangible benefits to healthy behavior or of a behavioral change, then that's a big factor that impacts how we market or talk about an issue. That's why a lot of campaigns are designed really to evoke a fear response, right? Somebody in a voice box tells us that we shouldn't smoke, right? And the idea being that if there is an extreme cost that we associate, that maybe we're less likely to engage in what might be a risky behavior. So that's one major challenge in marketing and advertising about health, is that we don't necessarily see a tangible impact all of the time. So one idea here to think about is, and we're going to go over a lot of different models and theories, and then I'm going to have us break up and have each person talk about and explore a different theory. One of them is what's known as the health belief model, right? A good example of thinking about this model is maybe you have a relative, like a grandparent or uncle, who has lung cancer and was a heavy smoker, right? There is a good chance that that personal proximity to that relative and that experience they went through might lead to a change in your own health behaviors or actions, right? That as a result of experiencing proximity to a health issue, you're likely a lot more motivated to take action related, right? We can see statistics about rates of lung cancer, but it really hits different if it feels like it's impacted your own family and closer relationships. So under this model, right, the health belief model suggests that we will be adversely affected if we don't change. My uncle got lung cancer, I smoke, maybe I should change what I do, knowing the kind of genetic or hereditary risks that might come with smoking. There are considerable effects, right? Lung cancer could be fatal, it could be deadly, it could have a really major impact on health and well-being, it could be very expensive. Chemotherapy could be a really awful procedure to go through. So that's another consideration. There's a behavior change that could prevent an undesired outcome, right? That oftentimes is the hard part, actually getting behavior change to happen. Addiction is really challenging. And so, it's not easy to no longer be a smoker, but maybe means that somebody uses an cigarette. Maybe it means that they are trying to seek care or support, or are trying to reduce the amount that they smoke, right? The effect or cost of that preventative behavior is worthwhile, right? We know, yikes, that was a really big risk, and I am on track to be at risk. So given that, it is worthwhile for me to try to make that change, even though it might be really hard, right? So we're oftentimes moved or motivated based on what's known as a novel occurrence. Again, something that's new, something that's striking, something that's surprising, and brings our attention or focus into an issue in a way that we really didn't think about before, right? In this case, having a relative with lung cancer, it might not have been a thing that you thought about at all, and suddenly something that you're very concerned with, right? My father passed away a couple of years ago from pancreatic cancer. That was not a type of cancer that I was particularly knowledgeable about or knew a whole lot about. And suddenly, right, I'm a lot more concerned about that version and about my own risk based on that experience. It's based on perception of susceptibility, right? How likely do we see ourselves as being at risk of that issue? Again, we can think about things like genetic factors, but also thinking about social or cultural factors as well, right? If we're living in a town or a location in which, a violent act has taken place, we're likely to be more on edge, knowing that we were in proximity to that event, right? For instance, imagine folks in Buffalo following the shooting that occurred in that area. We're moved as well by cues to action and other signals, right? So there might be something that's motivating or driving us to act. Maybe it's a family member who helps us to identify some of the ways to manage or help in smoking, knowing the risk and decisions that we make related to that, right? Again, there's a lot of decision factors there on a variety of topics, including smoking, but I did think that it was a useful example to think about in terms of how we proximally experience and respond to what we believe what might be risk. So there's also what is known as social cognitive theory. You might be familiar with this theory in like a psychology or sociology or even a communication class. How many people have heard about Bandura and the Bobo doll? A couple of you. So I'm going to share a short video that is this experiment, right? And this experiment is about how our behavior changes, and particularly how we have changes in behavior in response to what we perceive to be observations of other people's behavior.
Segment here about the school is taken from early experiment on learning of aggressive styles of behavior to modulate. Children watched a film adults perform novel aggressive acts for a play of doll, and physical aggression was accompanied by novel hostile remarks. We later measured how much of this modeled aggression the children had learned just by watching. Now, the measurement of learning of aggression uses simulated targets rather than live ones. For example, to test how well bombardiers have learned bombing strategies, use simulated targets rather than require them to bomb San Francisco or New York. The model pummeled the doll with the mallet, flung it in the air, kicked it repeatedly, threw it down, and beat it. It was once widely believed that seeing others vent aggression would bring the viewers aggressive drive, and the key exposure to aggressive modeling is harder to hide. Exposure to aggressive modeling increased attraction to guns, even though it was never modeled. Guns had less appeal to children who had no exposure to aggressive modeling. The children also picked up the novel hostile language.
The dual wielding there is kind of concerning. So famous experiment from Albert Bandura, right? Kids see the video of the woman that's attacking the doll with the mallet, and doing other aggressive behavior. And it's this idea of social modeling, right? That the kids see that and then they think, with no other instruction, I should go in and I should attack this doll too. And also that the aggressive behavior escalates, right? The kids are like calling the doll names. They're like getting out a gun, even though that's not part of the original model, and so on. The whole idea here being that the behavior we do is severely modeled by others around us, even if we don't necessarily know why other people are doing something, right? So this is a useful way of thinking about our motivations surrounding health as well, right? That the social factors, the modeling, and what we encounter around us has a really big role in shaping the behaviors that we choose for ourselves. For example, if you grew up in a household where people drank a lot of soda, right? And that was just a part of your household and part of your experience, that behavior was likely picked up on and modeled and something that you continue to do yourself. So we make decisions from things like our emotions, right? We were noticing, right, that the kids were experiencing this like aggression and this feeling of taking out that aggression. But we also are interested in social approval. We're interested in fitting in, and we're interested in sort of doing what's consistent with others in the group, right? This fear of missing out is something that motivates a lot of our behavior too. That we think, oh, we should beat up the doll because we've seen this video of somebody else beating the doll as a motivating factor, right? In other words, these social and environmental factors should ideally synchronize or match each other. In other words, we want to do what is consistent with what we see other people in the world doing, or what we see people that we look up to or we want to fit in with doing. Again, that's where things like a lot of peer pressure come in. We see that, a lot of our friends are smoking and maybe we're interested, or we pick up on that as well. In fact, a lot of folks who smoke identify that a lot of the peer pressure and social influence was a big thing motivating that initially. So social cognitive theory is about understanding what motivates us and how modeling of other people impacts the decisions that we make. And that's important as we think about health and science, because social modeling at times can be a lot more powerful than a specific campaign, right? We're more motivated by what other people are doing. So if people are cracking jokes and making fun of like a video about sex education, we're more interested in like the social response to it rather than the message. There's also what's known as the embedded behavior model, right? And this is arguing that behaviors that we have tend to endure or last to the extent that they're important to our lifestyle or self-image and are supported by various factors in our lives. For example, right, you might be having a habit of regularly drinking caffeine for a variety of reasons, maybe in part because you have a coffee maker or you're easily able to access coffee, or you have a lot of mugs, right? Or a lot of your identity and personality is centered around drinking coffee and having regular access to caffeine. Right? So in this way, the behaviors that we do are based on what we see as supporting how we want to present ourselves to other people. For instance, maybe you choose to drink at a party because you want to show that you're fun and you want to convey that self-image out of the belief that that is something that displays to others that you are a fun person, regardless of whether or not that's actually necessary, right? So one way of thinking about this is a combination of complex factors that might influence something like smoking, right? And the ways in which the usage of imagery and advertising plays a really big role here, right? We might think about the types of figures that tend to promote certain behaviors and actions that we do. For example, I know for several years, and I'm forgetting which beer company did this, but there was this prolonged advertisement campaign that was like the most interesting man in the world, right? And he was like, there were like stories about him, and it was this like advertisement where he would keep just showing himself as this interesting, suave figure, right? To encourage or show the types of people that drank that company's beer, right? Another kind of historic example that actually was phased out was Marlboro, right? Cigarette company had what was known as the Marlboro Man, or this kind of like macho cowboy type of character who was representing or standing in for the ideal self-image or demographic that might be interested, right? And so drawing from that image to show that, you know, smoking was an appealing thing to do. So I'll show you an ad that kind of, it was older, but it was an example of how this type of imagery was being utilized.
Marlboro country is everywhere, anywhere in the land, from east to west, north to south, from the lakes to the Rio Grande.
Very
From
60s.
Manhattan Towers to towering pines, the Marlboro legend grew. Till today, it's the brand which won the West and the rest of the country too. Come to where the flavor is. Come to Marlboro country.
So the Marlboro Man was used for several years as kind of the mascot, right, of Marlboro cigarettes. Clearly is trying to show that there's this, you know, he's flying, he's riding a horse, he's interesting, right? And this type of character is being used to promote sort of self-image or lifestyle that the company or brand is appealing to, right? A good experiment is anytime you see a commercial that's advertising a product, what are the types of people that are depicted in that commercial, and therefore, what are the types of people that that commercial is trying to target and appeal to? There is also what's known as the theory of reasoned action. So this is another thing that might impact the behavior that we do and how we might respond to a campaign. And we can think about it like a dog that is primed to do a trick if they know that they'll receive some type of treat or reward for doing so. For example, my dog not only knows how to shake, but if there's a treat or there's something she wants, she'll reach out and she'll try to shake repeatedly so that she can get more treats. It's not just that she shakes once, it's that she keeps trying to do it because she thinks that she might get more treats if she keeps doing that behavior, right? In the same way, we as human beings make decisions based on what we see as positive outcomes. Again, we can think about it as like a rat pushing a button and knowing if they push that button that a treat will be dispensed for them. Therefore, right, we see that there's positive outcomes and what we see as positive social implications of doing that behavior. For example, maybe you want to go and buy, again, if you grew up in like late 90s, 2000s, where this is a thing, you go and you buy the trendy clothes from Abercrombie and Fitch. And if you wear those, then you'll have more social acceptance and people will like you better, right? That belief motivated that behavior change based on that outcome. And so theories of reason and action makes general assumptions about how people behave and how people respond to stimuli. We like pleasure, we don't like pain, we like the path of least resistance. So we engage in behaviors and make choices based on positive, personal, and social outcomes, right? So we might make a variety of decisions about our health based on some of those factors. That's why if we think about an intervention in the context of a behavior that's seen by other people as unhealthy, the idea is that the social implications and ramifications of continuing an undesired behavior will get somebody to change. There's also what's known as the theory of planned behavior, right? I know just about all of us have suffered from procrastination at least one point in their lives. We're getting close to the end of the quarter, so there's a good chance that you have experienced a lot of challenges with planned behavior, right? Life happens while you're making plans. A lot of what we see as happening in our lives does not line up with the goals that we might set for ourselves or the behavior that we're hoping will end up happening. In other words, right, we could plan to make a change in our behavior or actions, but at times there's a gap between our plans and what actually occurs for a variety of reasons. For example, maybe you say to yourself, yes, I know that I need to go to the dentist. I know that I need to get to an appointment. I've got my classes, I've got everything else. I have an appointment scheduled, all set up, and oh no, my alarm didn't go off and I slept through it, right? So one of the challenges, and you can think back to this about addressing health disparities, is that somebody might be interested and they might want to make a change for themselves, but for whatever reason are not able to act out on their plans. And again, in thinking about disparities in access to something like a diagnosis or a screening, that oftentimes is a factor. That in the abstract, yes, I want to do a screening, I want to schedule it, but then the actual time comes around, and for whatever reason, somebody cancels. So that's an important consideration, is removing a lot of the barriers and gaps that have impacted people's ability to act on a planned behavior. And this is this idea of intention, right? We develop our intentions for a variety of reasons, our attitudes or beliefs about the thing and the behavior that we should do or want to do. Whether or not we see the plan that we're making as acceptable and rewarding, and to what extent we feel like we're able to carry it out. If you have ever received a text message or an email or a phone call that's related to voting, right, including voting in the state of Oregon, I got a bunch of texts bombarded over the last few weeks because, Oregon just had a primary yesterday for a variety of races, including governor, several House races, and Senate, right? There were a lot of advertisements and calls that would ask questions such as, do you have a plan to vote? I noticed that especially when I lived in the state of Utah, where we did not have vote by mail. You actually had to go into a polling station to vote, right? This idea of, do you have a plan to do this, is a campaign specifically targeted on the theory of planned behavior, right? trying to make sure that you have developed a set of steps that, despite your support for something in the abstract, will lead you to actually act on the behavior change that you do, right? A lot of campaigns fail because while somebody agrees at point A, they can't get all the way to point Z for a variety of reasons. And then, as I was mentioning before, and this ties pretty closely to the capacity of a health campaign to actually change behavior, there's this idea of what's known as the trans-theoretical model. In other words, we might address or think about an issue or a problem, but there are a lot of things that need to happen in order for us to actually change and adopt that behavior, right? So, for instance, maybe we drink a lot of sugary sodas every day, right? And we know that we need to reduce our sugar intake, drinking that much sugar is bad for us, so on. But there are a lot of things that we have to figure out in order to do so. First of all, there's this idea of pre-contemplation. We don't know about the problem, maybe we're continuing to drink sodas and so on, right? We're in that point in our lives. Then we realize, drinking soda is bad for me. Drinking this much sugary soda might lead to a consequence, like it might make me more likely to be diabetic. Therefore, behavior change that I need to do is to reduce the amount of soda that I have, or maybe to choose, carbonated beverages that have less sugar in them. So I now know what the problem is. Preparation is the intent or the steps that you need to do in order to act or change that behavior. So what I intend to do is to reduce the amount of soda that I have to about 3 days a week. And on the other 4 days, I'll drink this low sugar alternative. Action, right, is actually doing the thing. Fake it till you make it, right? Actually implementing that change in behavior. And then maintenance, right, is the idea of sustaining that behavior over a prolonged period of time. One area that's interesting in thinking about health is to think about a lot of kind of like fad diet efforts, right? So a lot of times there'll be like a diet that's circulating and is really popular and gets a lot of kind of pop science attention. A lot of these kinds of diet strategies don't work for a lot of people because of the maintenance stage. That while it might work initially for losing weight, it's very difficult to maintain the particular lifestyle or practices that diet is trying to get people to do. So in this way, right, a good health campaign might be one that thinks about all 5 of these things, that people don't just take an action, but they also have to cognitively think through what they need to do in order to actually implement the change that's required. So what I want us to take some time to do is, we've gone over a lot of different theories and ideas here. And I want you to imagine that you are developing a health campaign that's designed to encourage high school students to have a healthy school lunch. I want you to think about how this theory or approach might help you to develop a campaign that would promote this healthy school lunch. So we've talked about these 6, and then I'm going to assign you and give you the chance to start to think about this. You don't need to write this down for attendance, but you might take some notes to be prepared to share a little bit about this. So we'll start on this side here with Grant, the health belief model. Kiana will do social cognitive theory. Emily, embedded behavior. Angeline, theory of reason action. Macy, theory of planned behavior. Dina, theory trans-theoretical model. Izzy, health belief. Kane, social cognitive. Crew, embedded behavior. Patrick, theory of reason action. And JJ, theory of planned behavior. Again, health belief is about having an event or situation that causes us to have a change. Social cognitive, think about the Bandura dolls and modeling. Embedded behavior, think back to what motivates us to adopt sustained behaviors. Reasoned action, developing a plan based on reinforcement. Planned behavior, the disparity between our plans or goals and what we actually do. and trans-theoretical, focusing on those 5 steps that we have to do. So take some time to think about this, how your theory or model might help you develop this campaign. take about 3 more minutes to continue thinking through this. Looks like most folks are about done here. So I'd like to hear from folks that have talked through or thought through each of these 6 and some of the ways that they might work on designing the campaign based on that theory and approach. So let's start by talking a little bit about the health belief model. So I believe we had Grant and then I think Izzy as well. So Grant, what did you come up with here on how you might develop this campaign?
So I thought of it as like it mentioned before that how the adverse effects change how we actually do it. And so one of the ways was to show how junk food actually affects our body, and then show how like a nutritious, like balanced meal would also affect our body and our mood, and how that plays a factor in the decisions we make when it comes to healthy lunches and stuff like that. Another one was to the long-term effects and show just some stats behind that.
Yeah. Izzy, what about you?
I agree with everything. So like making sure students know the negative effects of eating healthy versus like a balanced diet, and also like the long-term effects, so like obesity, hypertension, diabetes, and it could be helpful to like maybe have people who have been affected by that share their stories and what they could have changed. And then one thing I would like when you're talking about it was considerable effects, and so I think one problem with that is like cost and convenience. Like you only have so much time for lunch, so it's important to make sure that it's cheap but also convenient for kids. So maybe like having it in schools and so they don't just go to McDonald's to get a burger.
Right. I think it kind of retroactively explains a lot of the PSAs and campaigns we were probably exposed to when we were younger, right? Seeing a lot of like visuals about the impacts of something, or having like a guest come in who has some proximity to an issue, right? Health belief model is really helping us to get that clear kind of visceral response that shows us a potential event that would not be desired, for sure. And then social cognitive theory. Kiana, what stood out to you?
Well, this is a physical theory, and thinking about social thinking from the study is very important. So I was thinking of putting maybe like people that are like, I would say like celebrities, like maybe like nutritionists or people that can vouch for healthy school lunches to come in and speak to kids and talk to them about maybe their stories and like maybe athletes that they've worked with.
Mhm.
And explain the effects of nutrition and the pros to that. And then also I was thinking, maybe more like visual wise. If you were able to get something that was like an athlete, being able to get $7 dollars for healthy eating and social media platforms like that. So they get a lot more socially accessible for them. So they feel comfortable like wanting to go into the healthy direction.
Sure. Kane, what about you?
This almost immediately reminded me of the Got Milk.
Oh, yeah.
All over the place.
The milk mustache? Yeah.
And so I was mostly on that track, where you put up like posters, flyers, of advertising for people that kids look up to, like celebrities, and just eating healthy foods that's for lunches. I
Mhm.
don't know how celebrities eat
Hmm.
school lunches, but something like that.
Yeah.
Or like something like you got milk.
Yeah, it's a good example. Yeah, something of like the ubiquity of it, right? Like I think about that campaign, right, where they have the milk mustaches to encourage people to literally drink milk, right? I think it was from like the National Dairy Farmers Association or whatever, but right, like they would have visuals of all sorts of people, like with the milk mustaches, and just try to show how many people are drinking milk. And similarly, with like having nutritionists, celebrities, people with some level of authority or relationship to a topic, like just making it so prevalent and so widely known and so widely believed seems to be a big part of social cognitive theory. I think about a lot of the language that's used in a lot of campaigns. For example, "Are you in?" right? Has this kind of like social acceptance to it as a big part that motivates us to be involved too. Let's talk next about embedded behavior. So Emily, what stood out to you?
So I wanted to like embed the idea that like
Mhm.
maybe like a screen or like TV or something that just shows like celebrities and athletes
Mhm.
like how the like can head
Mhm.
and then just like having a whole bunch of like food investment cases and then like so this is like
Mhm.
and instead of it got milk poster, it got influence poster.
Mm.
And then for like advertising wise, I would say like a healthy eating advertisement like in the school. You know how you can like buy out like donuts that are like specifically advertised,
Mhm.
just like have that like public on.
Mhm. True.
So like, I mean, you said like, get like people that the students can like respect and relate to.
Yeah.
If you like bring in some random dude from an organization that's like preaching to them, they're like, wow. So definitely do that, and then like I said, don't be too preachy because they might be sensitive because of it being preachy in nature, and then
Yeah.
since their behaviors before this were already so embedded, instead of trying to like change their old embedded behaviors, focus on embedding new behaviors into them,
Yeah.
while also still giving the students those features.
Yeah. I'm glad you're considering age, right? As we've kind of talked about it. We're trying to advertise to high schoolers and it's not interesting or fun or it's very out of touch, it's not going to be very effective. Using things like social media, kind of engaging with the needs of a younger generation is an important part of that campaign working. So let's talk next about reasoned action. So I believe we've got Angela up on that one.
So from this theory, basically like talks about how humans make choices based on how strongly they believe the behavior will lead to positive outcomes. I basically said that like by explaining, like talking about how eating healthy and like all the positive benefits that you can get from that will help them to like believe that this is actually a good thing. And also explaining like all the pros and all the pros and how it impacts our mental and physical well-being. And also having like a spokesperson-ish like doing so, it would like help them to believe that this can actually happen.
And Patrick?
So I didn't really think of any necessary solutions, just because there's, with this one, it's like, you want them to believe that there's gonna be good outcomes from it, but also it's like, clock is cheap until you do it.
Yeah.
So I was just saying that, you would need to figure out how to make it more normally acceptable. And then also, like you said, you want to make it in a positive attitude where people would think like, oh, well, if I change my behavior in the right way, eat healthy, then I'll be more socially acceptable by like my friends and by the teachers and everyone. Because, that's like what they want to be. You want to try to make it where they have more. You want them to be like more socially acceptable.
Yeah, and that's a challenge, right? Because again, we can't actually see the behavior change in a campaign in every situation, right? Talk can be cheap, and oftentimes we're not persuaded by, you should do this thing, it will make you do well. Like sometimes we have a first response to that. We don't believe it. We think it might be a scam, right? Or we don't actually think that it will have much of an impact at all. So dealing with this kind of feeling of apathy and trying to create like an immediate tangible impact, that's a challenge that campaigns continue to deal with. That's why sometimes like at a school, they might actually adopt like an entire week where they only offer like certain kinds of healthy food or something like that. So they're trying to show a tangible effect. So let's talk about planned behavior, Jason.
So the theory of planned behavior is kind of focuses on intentions. And intentions are created due to attitudes about the behavior of rewarding and like socially acceptable we think it is, and the extent to which we can actually do it. So everyone self-efficacy. And so I think that using this theory, the campaign should focus on changing those three things within the students. So basically campaigning about, we're trying to change the attitude about healthy eating. So similarly to what other people said, I was thinking like getting some kind of spokesperson that the kids look up to and see as a role model, and showing them eating healthily for healthy lunches, and have them talk about why it's important, the rewards that come from it. And then while some students might have good attitudes about healthy eating, think it's good, and understand like that it is good for you, they might not believe that they can actually do it. And so maybe having like some kind of educational portion within the campaign, where you can like teach students how to eat healthily, or just encourage them in ways that first, so that they know that they can actually do it. It's not like this unreachable task, I guess.
Yeah. JJ, how about you?
I have a few things. So I basically wanted to like change the idea of that school lunches gross.
Yeah.
There's stigma of like fast, there's nasty. Also like, provide examples of like healthy school lunches, different options. Students also provide testimonies that shows that positive outcome. Also maybe even like a slogan, feel that Texas students provide themselves to be healthy. And also maybe even starting a healthy eating program for students. That way they feel involved in such a
Yeah. I really appreciate, JJ, the way you bring in a lot of different factors and elements that are impacting like a lot of student decisions, like the stigma of school lunch being gross. So why would I try to have something that's healthy? Creating a campaign or slogan that can really try to get us interested and engaged. There are a lot of ways that things can work effectively. Macy, this idea of teaching students how to have healthy school lunches is interesting too. If you've seen the show Queer Eye on Netflix, right? The entire basis of the show is that the person in the episode gets a makeover, right? And the various people are in charge of different parts of that makeover. One is like fashion, another is like sort of like in counseling and mental health. And then one person is doing like food. And one of the things that I always find interesting is that the like food coaching that happens is trying to teach like healthy and simple meals that work in that person's lifestyle. So in kind of a weird kind of coaching way, right? This person will get up and he'll like be like, hey, here's a really easy guacamole, right? So examples like that can help with planned behavior because they can help to show and model how to do an easy change that fits within somebody's lifestyle and their interests. And let's talk last about the trans theoretical model. So we only have one person doing that one, so feel free to share.
Alright, so basically what everybody's been talking about, but also try to have both stories before they think about school lunches as well. Instead of just eating salad or wraps, so like some people don't like to eat vegetables together, which is what's that? When everybody eats that, it's like a little letter. Brussels sprouts, yeah, I know.
I think they're great cooked the right way.
Same here. I love.
But yes, yeah,
But yeah,
a lot of people don't.
some people don't have like, the same taste as everybody else, so what they can do is like come to the school and kind of advertise a little bit, like what kind of options do they think is the best, like first to that, so they went to Red Light, like Red Hall to talk about rather than like what other stuff you guys want to change about the menus besides having the same thing over and over with the target entire eating. See here like what the student's perspective is, what things they want to change about the food menu, and also like setting out like samples for them to taste to get used to the samples instead of like eating like raw Brussels sprouts or something like
Yeah.
but stuff like that, and also like get the opinion from the students and options and comments about what things do we think besides having your salads or wraps. So like for example, if they do end up liking one of the samples that one of the campaigns there, they can start serving during lunches little by little. If they see if they like it more often, grab more like the second, you can advertise more and expand it,
Yeah,
stuff like that.
yeah. Who here hates cilantro? Has the soap gene? Few of you. Interesting. There's a gene that means that either cilantro is delicious or it tastes awful, tastes like soap, right? It's an example of like what you're identifying. People have different tastes. I like this idea of having students like actually involved in the process of creating or deciding on the food that's offered too, right? One of the challenges we see a lot is sort of like long-term change in behavior, right? Issues of like relapse or actually adapting to change. You could have healthy food for a while or ask people to have a healthy lifestyle for a week and they say, oh, that was interesting. And they go right back to what they did before. So actually having long-term behavioral change is challenging. Having the space for people to maybe like have a cheat day or have a free day or have like a combination of the things that they like with ways to do things a little bit more healthily, like those have been strategies that have been effective too. Long-term change is still a really big issue that relates to actually adjusting and altering our behavior. So really good observations and points here, right? And I think these different theories like lead us to similar, but at times distinct conclusions about how a campaign is designed and how a campaign can work successfully, recognizing that our actual process of making decisions and changes as humans is going to look a little bit different person to person. So let's take a break and come back at about 3:20 or so. Well, the few points to hit on, we'll do a group activity for the end, and that'll cover our key ideas for the day.
It's nice, like, I remember doing one. Yeah. My girlfriend.
All right, let's pick this stuff back up and chat a little more. So we were talking about some of the theories that guide us to create a good campaign. I appreciated your observations there. We'll kind of build on this, talk about some of the other elements, including culture, that tend to shape a lot of the ways that we develop campaigns. And then we'll be looking at the article that I have posted for this week that explores some specific campaigns and approaches to this. So we might think back to the very beginning of the quarter, right, where when we think about and define what health is and what it means to be healthy, right, there's not a single definition. In fact, as I talked about before, this question of cochlear implants is one that a lot of members of disability communities have a lot of disagreement or discussion about. For instance, some people might choose implants in order to hear and process information better, but others consider being deaf to be a major part of their identity and experience and actively choose not to have the implants for the sake of their own identity and what they mean to be healthy. And again, this idea of what is healthy is not universal. For instance, there's been a lot of discussion surrounding the cultural elements of body type and size, a lot of discussion surrounding things such as body shaming, right? And the ways in which what somebody might consider to be a healthy body differ really wildly when we consider history, context, location, and so on. Even what's considered the quote ideal body type in the United States has changed substantially over the years. So these ideas about what health and what healthy behavior is are not universal or not set in stone, right? There might be risks or concerns that we might associate, right? We know that, for instance, smoking increases the risk of cancer, but we also know that a lot of elements of what it means to live a healthy life differ depending on the person and situation. In this way, a critical cultural approach is considering health as it relates to a variety of issues, both in terms of what we consider to be healthy, but also in terms of what we consider as the available options or strategies that we can do in order to encourage healthy behavior and healthy campaigns, right? For instance, more individualistic cultures like the United States are more likely to generate health campaigns that are trying to target and specifically help people based on individual strength and achievement, right? Somebody, I think back to like even old cartoons, right? If you heard of Popeye, right? Popeye eats a bunch of spinach and suddenly gains a ton of strength and can like punch a villain across the room, right? In the same way, there's an individual focus. You do this healthy behavior, you personally benefit. And in more collectivist cultures, the advertising and sort of approach to healthy behavior is more focused on the benefit of the larger community, family, or group. So the critical cultural approach thinks about those things. What we consider to be best or healthy differs a lot. And there's also this idea that there's collective efficacy, the belief that change can happen, right? We oftentimes find ourselves perhaps skeptical of actually triggering or causing a behavioral change, or about our ability to stick with a change, especially if we feel a pattern of relapse, right? If you've seen the show Euphoria on HBO, right? A lot of the main character who's gone through rehab, a lot of her hangups, especially early on, are just, why do I bother going to rehab or going through all this if I'm just going to relapse again, right? So efficacy is an issue there. And then community capacity refers to the resources that a group or population believes that they have in order to properly solve or deal with an issue. For example, right, in the context of COVID-19, there have been a lot of case shortages, including shortages of testing kits, shortages of access to a mask, especially early on, right? And so resources and capacity within a community, especially thinking about geographic location like Eastern Oregon, right, are important considerations too. By the way, the government has just allowed folks to order more test kits if they need them. So when we think about culture, right, and we think about the various elements that help to shape who we are and shape how we approach and think about various issues and topics, there are a variety of ways that our own health campaign or strategy can be adapted to think about those demographics, right? So as you're thinking about and maybe working through your campaign essay for this class, you might think about how the campaign is considering culture or the beliefs or concerns that are impacting a particular demographic, right? There's a spectrum that runs from stereotypes, really offensive ways to like try to appeal to a cultural group, but also ways that can be informative and helpful. Again, seeing yourself within the campaign or advertisement or public health effort can be a really empowering experience. So there's this idea of what's known as source homophily, right? When we think about spokespeople or demographics or the ways in which issues are represented, right? Oftentimes, the populations represented stand in for or align with the issue or topic that's being addressed, right? So again, it might be a really prominent athlete encouraging people to get out and really encourage athletic behavior, regular workouts, and so on. Or it could be that somebody that has experienced domestic violence is speaking out or addressing that topic or issue. If you're familiar with Malala Yousafzai, she was somebody that was shot, right? And following that experience has been a very prominent spokesperson for peace and addressing a variety of conflict and violence, right? So having personal proximity to an issue oftentimes gives you a unique level of authority and relatability. Also, there's what's known both as a gain frame and a loss frame, and those can be used as strategies for trying to appeal and make your message persuasive. Oftentimes, we benefit from a feeling of empowerment or positivity that comes from taking an action. For instance, right? A lot of the way that advertisements depict like taking a medication is somebody's sad, maybe they're dealing with depression or anxiety and there's like a literal cloud over their head or something like that. And the imagery that's used when this health solution is provided to them is that the clouds are gone, the skies are opening, it's a sunny day, there's uplifting music, you can go outside again, right? That's using a gain frame, a positive implication of their action. A loss frame is saying the negative repercussions. Again, a lot of the PSAs and targeted advertisements for teenagers, right? These are the dangers of examples of using the loss rate and using that level of fear to try to make a change happen. There's also this question of logic versus emotion, right? If you've taken a class on rhetoric and on persuasion, you're probably familiar with ethos, pathos, logos. Aristotle's view that ideally we would only have logic, we would only have, reaching a deduction or conclusion, right? If you're familiar with Star Trek, Spock and Vulcans, right, are characters that try to control their emotions and just make logical decisions. That approach, of course, doesn't work in every situation in the real world, but it can be a part of the argument, saying it's logical, statistically, you will live longer if you make this change. Whereas an emotional appeal says what somebody should believe to motivate behavior and values, right? Trying to appeal to the emotions or feelings that can cause change. Again, these could be fears. It could be a desire to be like somebody that is depicted as an inspirational figure in media. There's what's known as the extended parallel process model. This is the idea that people tend to evaluate a threatening message by considering factors like their own personal risk. One of the reasons that campaigns that use fear are not necessarily persuasive is out of the belief this will never happen to me. Sure, if there is a big car accident and somebody is buffeted around the car because they don't have a seatbelt on, become a projectile to other people, yeah, that'd be horrible, but I'm not going to get in an accident, so why would I wear a seatbelt, right? That's this idea of this disparity between a message being threatening and the degree to which somebody feels personally affected by that. So sometimes the belief in the actual impact of a message can be somewhat diluted by that. And then also this idea of guilt, right? Guilt can be a really powerful motivator too. For instance, sometimes one tactic that some advertisements will try to use is to say, she was destined to be a great, soccer player and was going to go to law school and had this bright future ahead. And then she was a victim of a hit and run. Be careful when you're driving or something like that, right? Oftentimes using those guilt appeals and making somebody feel bad, especially in a social context for friends and family, can play a really big role too, right? So this idea, think back to source homophily, birds of a feather flock together. We like to see similarities to ourselves because if we do, we know that the campaign works for people that are like us. So I wanted to shift gears a little bit and talk about the Alcalay article. It's another pretty short piece, but I thought it would be a good supplement to your reading this week to try to understand mass communication campaigns and the way that these larger campaigns and efforts are trying to reach groups of people. And again, kind of building off of the ideas that we talked about, the key goal here is to try to understand in what situations these campaigns do or don't work. And when we think about mass communication more generally, right? Communication that is targeted to a broad audience and using the same message to multiple people, what can and can't that type of communication do? And there's a few discoveries that they find in this piece. One of them is that changing an attitude, changing a behavior, that's a difficult process. That involves a lot of steps. And that is very hard for mass communication to do, especially when mass communication messages are not especially interactive or engaging, right? You see advertisements all the time about the risks of a health behavior, or, all the time we see various advertisements for various things. Why is this one going to stand out and be the thing that suddenly causes you to change your mind? So that's one problem with mass communication. In other words, though, mass communication is good at that final step of the trans-theoretical approach about long-term doing something, right? So if you have just quit smoking and you see that there's, a commercial talking about the risks or negative effects of smoking, you might feel better about that decision, knowing that that risk was happening. Additionally, mass communication is limited, again, due to its lack of engagement and focus on audiences. In other words, mass communication can't appeal in a specific way, but we also know that some of the best ways that we learn and change our behavior is when we have a more hands-on, interactive, and learning experience. If somebody is showing us and teaching us how to cook a meal, and we actually cook that meal for ourselves and practice it, that's much more likely to stick with us than a recipe showing up as an advertisement as we're checking YouTube, right? So that can be a really big part of that too. Another kind of interesting thing is that a lot of like meal delivery kits, like your HelloFresh and Purple Carrot, have gotten popular as the basis of trying to create like simplicity in audience engagement. And then the last thing, as we were talking a little bit about, is that we need to think about social context, right? We need to think about the factors that might cause somebody to make a decision or not. Again, thinking about social cognitive theory, thinking about how oftentimes we're making decisions based on observation, based on our habits, based on desirable behavior, that a campaign is going to be filtered and kind of refracted on that basis. So those are some key takeaways from the article, but I'm going to ask you to take some time to explore some of the points that are raised in this piece in a little bit more detail. So I'm going to have 3 different groups, and each group is going to focus on both one of the theories or concepts that comes up in this piece, and also one of the 3 campaigns that's discussed in this article. And what I want you to do is, using that theory and using that campaign that gets talked about in this piece, take some time in groups to first figure out the assumptions of that theory. We've talked a little bit about social learning, but take some time to explore it and the other 2, if you're assigned them. How this theory helps to explain the campaign, right? So using that theory, what you learn, and what does this campaign teach us about effective health and science communication? So it looks like we've got 11 folks. So we'll do 4, 4, and 3. So we will do 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1, 2, and 3. Group 1, social learning theory and prevention of smoking. Group 2, cognitive dissonance and alcoholism. Group 3, diffusions of innovation and heart disease prevention. So take some time in your groups to talk about this, and take some time to write down or type your group's answers to these questions. So,
Don't get near it. They're okay with it. See a bottle. Then be like, oh, they're like, need like a bottle with them. My God. Just sparkling water.
So take a couple more minutes to continue working through this. Go ahead and finish up. Since we're coming pretty close to the end here, so I won't ask each group to share, but I will encourage you as you're working through this reading for this week's quiz to continue to look at some of these different theories and their approaches. Just to kind of refresh you, since cognitive dissonance and fusion innovation are the two kind of new ones there, right? Cognitive dissonance is the experience where our beliefs and our behaviors don't line up. So for example, right, if you consider yourself a vegan and you're eating like a cheese pizza, right, then that'd be an example of cognitive dissonance where your beliefs and behaviors don't match. So one goal that some campaigns might try to do is to elicit cognitive dissonance, where what you believe and what you want doesn't necessarily match up with what you're actually doing. In fact, a lot of advertisements getting people to adopt a pet, right? A lot of shelters have those like very sad advertisements in an effort to create cognitive dissonance. And then diffusion of innovations is an approach or theory that tries to understand what it takes in order for a new idea or thought to be presented. So what needs to happen for a new intervention or approach to enter the public consciousness? One example being PrEP, right? PrEP is taken as kind of an oral pill that helps to reduce the ability of somebody to contract HIV who is not currently HIV positive, right? And that communicating about PrEP, what it does and its effects, can be a challenge and involves a variety of steps to integrate that into public health behavior. So, you know, I appreciated the groups taking some time to explore and to think about these topics a bit. I think you all have some really good insights and ideas to share here. So to wrap up for today, I took some time to talk a little bit about the campaign essay and extra credit. Let me know if you need any help as you're working through those, or have questions about your grade in the course at this stage, since it should be current. We talked about a variety of theories and approaches that explain our motivations for health and science behavior. Again, this will be useful as you think about your essay for this class, because it gets at the why. What motivates us to actually change, and what behaviors are being invoked for making a campaign work successfully. And then we consider things like social, cultural, and contextual factors can also influence the effectiveness and impact that these campaigns have. So on Monday, we're going to be talking about gender and health and science communication and some of the unique impacts and issues related to gender. Just as a reminder, we're only going to be meeting on Monday. We're not going to have a class meeting the following Wednesday, since I'll be traveling for a conference, but we'll be able to pick up on and explore that topic next Monday in a little bit more detail. So have a great rest of your afternoon. Hopefully, sun's out again. We'll see what happens. Please, please pass forward or email me your group's work for today. I'll see you soon.
Okay.